Welcome to Hudson RPO's podcast on racial equality and diversity. Hear from Hudson RPO leaders as they encourage organizations to just start on their D&I journey.
Hello and welcome back to Just Start. With me, as always, are Casey Butler and Gary Jones. And joining us today are two additional guest stars. So from the Hudson family, we have Arnold Cherry. From the extended Hudson and family in one of our client environments is Janelle Gross, who are joining us to chat today. So thanks, guys, for joining. Appreciate you joining the discussion. So as always, we usually sort of get together before we record the conversation to talk about what we think would be interesting to discuss. And for today's conversation, we had planned to talk about what is meaningful in terms of action that companies are taking to support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what is performative, and what is the difference in the experience of that as an employee of those organizations. And I think, given the backdrop of what we saw in the last week with really horrific violence against the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in Atlanta, we're seeing this now, right? A lot of companies sort of reacting to that with statements. But I guess the question, Janelle, is, and it doesn't necessarily need to be directly related to the Atlanta incident, but just broadly, what have you, in your experience, what does feel different about a performative approach versus a really meaningful approach, and how does one tell and observe the difference between those two things?
Yeah, I think it's different for every person as to what performative and what's intentional. But for me and in my experience, I think the first step is acknowledging that it happens and acknowledging that it exists and allowing people to express their emotions regarding the situation. And not to take anything away from what happened, but going back to last year with George Floyd, allowing the opportunity for people to say, this hit me really hard. I need a day. And personally, I took a day because I have children, and explaining that to them was very emotional for me, and scary for them because they fit the demographics of George Floyd. Um, so saying that, I say, for like a general statement for a company to say, we understand that this has happened. If you need anything, we're here for you. Also asking, what does it look like that you need from us? What can we do to help you navigate these times and even facilitate conversations between demographics? So to me, at that very level is what I would love to see, where I believe that organizations are intentional in um, doing the work when it comes to diversity and inclusion. What's performative for me, or what I've actually seen in my experience, is we don't even acknowledge that anything has happened. So what happened in Atlanta this weekend, we're not talking about it, or it's just kind of, hey, let's have Chinese food for lunch to honor our, what happened. And it's like, really, guys? And I think that's where a lot of companies fall short, is that they don't identify with um, people who are directly impacted by this. And my thing is, ask them what they want, because do you think an Asian person wants Chinese food today? No, they don't. Or do you think that a Black person wants to, once the company's hiring targets, right? So we had an issue, not at this company, but before, with we're going to hire at least 12 Black people by the end of December, and it's like, we didn't ask for that. Like, we're asking for equality and acknowledging what we go through, and that's all we're asking for, is a seat at the table, considering us for who we are and what we need. So that's my long-winded way of saying that there is a difference between the two, but starting with your intended target and seeing what it is that they need first before you take action. So it does take some time in finding that balance between responding appropriately and responding intentionally.
And I appreciate that you brought up the very basic idea of actually asking people what they need in any given moment. And I think sometimes we do what we think others want us to do and don't bother to ask. At the same time, I do think, or what I guess the question is, like, what is the balance between asking somebody what they need and offering somebody something that they might not want to ask for, if that makes sense? So instead of putting all of the work onto somebody else to tell you what they need, is there a way to go about doing that, but also volunteering something that they might not have known to ask for? Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that that's a very fine line that has to be balanced between um, people in my position or in human resources or heads of organizations, because you want to do something, but you want to make sure that it is the right thing. And then to your point exactly, um, having the identified or demographic doing all the work for you is a hard place to be in, because I've been there. So I think this is where having a trusted source or confidant comes into play with that. So, speaking of what is happening now, maybe going to a friend of mine who is of Asian descent and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking of doing something. Does this feel okay?" And not, tell me what you need and I'll do whatever. But does this feel okay? And if it's, no, that's way totally off base. Okay, respect. I will start over again. And then also trying to put myself in someone's shoes when we're doing these things, if and to take diversity out of it. If employees are complaining about toilet paper, but we've put more plants in the building, like that's not what they're asking for, right? So just being mindful of what it is that is the trend, and double checking with making sure with whatever my intention is doesn't fall flat.
And what about one of the things I was thinking about, what about if the company has done the wrong thing, but they maybe realize it and think, how can we do better next time? How does that feel? When someone, because it's not happened to me personally, but I'm wondering, how does that feel to people in the organization? A lot of talk we've been talking about are people that we're trying to recruit from outside. We're not necessarily talking about the people who are living, breathing, and in the organization currently. But I wondered, when a company does something that isn't right, how can they course correct? How can they fix that? Gary, do you have any experiences with that?
It's a great question. Going back to all the things that we just talked about, which we've already kind of mentioned in previous podcasts. But I'm going to be honest with you folks. It's a lot tougher to look like you're a diverse and inclusive and equitable organization than to actually be one. And that's what people have to understand. I mean, it's tougher to look busy than to actually be busy, right? It's not sustainable. And so, to your point, Casey, and we talked about it before the podcast, is that, the organizations are doing things to look that way, and it's not malicious, right? But have they been able to actually do exactly what Janelle just mentioned? Talk to people, open up, find out exactly what it is, and let's get to the heart of the matter. Stop trying to look like you're a diverse and concerned organization, but be one. Be one. Do the things that you would do normally. If someone in your family has had a situation that's happened, you don't automatically assume what the solution is. You talk to your family, you talk to your friends, you have that solution. And those are the things that I think that we need to do more within the organization. So let's go to your question, Casey. If an organization has unfortunately done that and said, hey, look, this is what we felt the resolution was, right? And now they're discovering that, that's not really what it was. It's okay. I mean, it's no different than what they were doing before, right? Go back from the beginning and still talk to your folks and admit, hey, listen, this is what we were thinking. Apologies. Let's talk through, what we can do to be a little bit more relevant to what is going on within our own particular community, our own particular organization. So that would be my answer. I don't know, Arnold, if you have anything additional.
Well, yeah, I think one of the more, I would say, glaring examples of not listening to the room would be the situation with Google with their artificial intelligence organization and letting go not only two women, but one woman of color who spoke directly to the fact that it might be inherently racist, or at least that's what was being observed, was kind of filtering into their AI system.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of asking them and having the conversation when their um, their purpose was to speak to inclusion, to let them go because they spoke to that inclusion is about as tone deaf as you can get, and it's glaring as an example of we don't really want the inclusion we're asking for, and we can't be any more clear on the fact that we don't want that inclusion than excluding people that speak to that that exact standard.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an insightful example also of this idea of like, if companies do believe that diversity and equity and inclusion are core values, then wouldn't they reward those folks who are helping them to do better in that space? And what signal does it send if they are doing the opposite for what should have been viewed as an effort to help them to do better is instead viewed as something that is worthy of reprimand or is in some way punishable. So I guess for everyone, like knowing that does often happen, right? People who are trying to help their companies become more diverse and more equitable places are punished for those efforts. What signals to you that it is safe to engage in those kinds of activities? And Janelle, I think you sort of touched on this in saying like forums to be able to have a conversation and express how you're feeling, but obviously there's a lot of risk in that for you, right? So what signals to you that you are in a space within a corporate environment that is safe for you to express those kinds of thoughts and views?
I kind of navigate and I don't have a very good word other than the vibe that I get from the leadership of the company that I'm in. And I get that they're in positions where they are expected to lead and expected to be subject matter experts in their particular fields, but I don't expect them to know everything. And nor did I expect my leadership, even those that look like me in the leadership positions, to have all the answers that we're looking for. So I think for me, their vulnerability and openness is something that allows me to feel comfortable to speak out or know that they may be open to criticism or critique or whatever the word may be, to say, hey, I see this. This is what I think. What are your thoughts? As opposed to, and I don't think the woman's intention at Google, and actually maybe it was after the fact because it proved its point, but when she initially approached it, it wasn't, hey, you guys are racist. It was, this is what I'm seeing. Let's do something about it. And there's an opportunity right there to have a conversation and, take that little bit, that spark from that conversation and take it to another group to build this master plan. Like it doesn't have to be solved right there. And I personally, let me disclaim, Janelle personally doesn't look to the president of my company to solve all the DEI issues that we have in our company, right? I'm not looking for her to do that. I'm looking for her to facilitate the environment where we can do that work. And I think that's what I would like to think that's what other people want as well. Now, their intentions or approaches may be different than mine, but the environment of feeling safe to have those conversations to me is most important.
Well, and it just made me, I did some training recently on, effective communication with your teams, and vulnerability was one of the keys. And I don't think you can wait until something happens to be vulnerable. I think you have to build up to creating that relationship. You have to be vulnerable, all the time. You know, you have to, because then if you are, when something happens like the George Floyd incident, your team's going to feel comfortable having conversations with you about it. If that's the only time you're vulnerable, they're going to be like, whoa, can we trust this? You know, is this just because of this incident? Whereas if you've been that way all along, one of the things I found, because, you know, I tend to be vulnerable with my team, is that they felt comfortable having conversations about that in that moment. Whereas had I not been that way, it wouldn't have felt safe, I think, for us to have those conversations. So I think it's really important not to just wait, but to really live that all the time.
Yeah, and the misperception is if you don't have that open environment, that everything's okay. And so that's the case. And I'll bring this example up again. And again, it's back when a younger time in my life where people thought I sounded white, and they kept talking about it from a jovial standpoint, and I accepted that, right? So they thought it was okay, but it wasn't okay. It's not okay. It's inaccurate, extremely inaccurate. And it hurt my feelings. And to be honest with you, you know, it was great to get that off my chest. So now people understand that that's not okay. It's certainly not okay with me, right? That being said, if you do not have that two-way communication to understand each other, then there will be no improvement. And I think that a lot of times organizations or people, what happens is when people bring up suggestions and things, they feel it's a personal attack, you know, and they feel that, hey, look, this is all the effort that we've been doing, and this is the thanks I get, and this is what we're doing, and there's no two-way communication, and it's more of a defense based on what someone said, and it seems one-sided. And that's another thing that's happening, right? A lot of people are thinking that, oh gosh, if I do something, all of a sudden I'm racist. No, that's not the case. The case is that we have opportunity for both sides to understand each other more. The side that feels that, hey, listen, this could be construed as something offensive or racist or something that's prejudiced, and the other side saying, hey, so sorry, that wasn't the intent at all. Another thing that we talked about in a previous podcast, that's not the intent. This is what I was thinking to solve that misperception, right? So it doesn't go into the nth degree of blatant racism, you know, hatefulness, those types of things. So it gives the opportunity for both parties to get a better understanding once you do that. And it also lets us know that things aren't necessarily okay, right? And to your point, I think that, you know, the openness, the trusted environment, leading by example, admitting that you're human, all of those things come in play if you want to have a more flexible environment that does have a true, diverse, inclusive, and equitable type of approach.
Great. Arnold, I think you were looking to jump in there.
Oh, no, yeah.
You look like Ziggy, Arnold, a little bit. Can you, your headroom, you look like Ziggy. You remember Ziggy? I'm probably dating myself a little bit. There we go. There we go.
What a show mess. Is that better?
Yeah.
Or
you look great. You look great.
Okay. But yes, to Casey's point, it's a daily thing. I think there's a tendency to want to be for all sides almost to want to be, well, especially the majority, to want to be post-racial. I think, you know, when Obama was voted in, we've gotten, you know, past that. And now we're post-racial. And now we're, you know, a different society. And immediately after his presidency, we saw how incorrect that was. But we could feel it during his presidency that no, we're not post anything. We just had a milestone, but that doesn't cover all walks of life. You know, going to the store, or you know, the equal treatment in housing, or you know, the jail population, and you know, the workplace. There's a lot of work to be done, and it is daily work. So, but there's such a desire to feel like we're past something that we're not dealing with it day by day, to Casey's point, and it is an everyday thing. So
that's such an important point. I actually recently I saw a company's diversity statement, and it was something to the effect of like, we don't believe in labels, we believe in talent. And I just thought to myself, like, well, so now you're actually saying you believe in the erasure of identity, right? Like that people aren't bringing their whole selves to the conversation, and actually set that aside. We only care about your talent, not you. So I think, we're talking about like what should companies stop doing. I think maybe that's one of the things that they should stop doing, is trying to have this very feel-good conversation without actually getting into, well, how do we even get to a place where, it's about talent? And should it even get to a place where it's about talent and we're not considering the entirety of somebody's personhood? So in the vein of things that companies should stop doing, anything that you guys see as being particularly unhelpful, and things that companies really should reflect on before they do, either in response to incidents like the ones we just saw, or in general as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think the one and done approach that a lot of companies have taken, and it's been my experience for a lot of things, which is why I take them with a grain of salt, right? Like we had a trainer come in and teach us about microaggressions, 1 hour session, and we never talk about it ever again. And remember, we had that training with Jim back in 2016? Yeah, I remember that, but and then that's it. Well, we did that, so what do you mean? Or I've had conversations about diversity at the top, and it's like, well, you're a manager now, so we solved it. And it's like, I mean, no, and I, it, I look, I'm deep into therapy with all of this stuff because I'm rationalizing my feelings and everyone else's. And I'm now getting that it's an attack of the ego to these people, right? These people who feel like, well, I've done what you asked me to do, so what more do you want from me? And I'm not a racist because I did this, or I don't think this way. And like we've had these issues for as long as civilization has been around. So we're not asking for you to solve the problem tomorrow. And I'm not asking for Jim's seminar to be the be all end all to what I experienced last week at work. Like these things continue to happen. And I'm sorry, I'm long winded, but that whole
Great.
one and done approach really bothers me. Or just kind of like the tone deaf nature of some of these things, right? So they'll show these videos that like they did a quick Google search, right? So it's like how to be black in America. Here's a book, here's a video from that. And they show this video that was filmed in like 1987. And it's like, see, this is what's going on in America today. And it's like
It's
I know.
hard. It's hard to look like a diverse company,
Yeah,
much harder than to be
and
one.
definitely.
It's not sustainable. It's
It's
just not. You can't look busy for forever. Sooner or later, someone's going to know you're doing nothing.
I
You know,
really like that point that you made. Like that
Yeah.
that hit me now because I think about that. I think about that a lot because when everything happened last year and things are happening now, it's like, I'm so sorry. What do you want me to do? And I'm contradicting what I just said earlier about asking people, right? But like, don't put the onus on the victims to help you or to solve the problem for you. Like I'm open to a dialogue. Look, I can't articulate how I feel about this right now, but what I'm feeling is this. Um, and taking that and doing some more with it. What that looks like, I'm not sure all the time, but also like, oh, another thing, let me just add this is like, I don't represent all Black people, or that one Asian person you spoke to doesn't represent, or that one Latina doesn't represent all Latinas. Like, well, Janelle said she feels this way, so all Black people or all Afro Latinas must feel this way. Not at all. We all have very different experiences. So take that with a grain of salt as well. And I try to put that disclaimer on everything that I say when people say, well, what is it that we can do? Janelle feels this way, but
right, right.
put that in a box, right? That's it. So,
Yeah, yeah. And don't think
yeah.
people are unappreciative, right?
Mhm.
We understand, but listen, it's been centuries, as you mentioned, of this, right? So the one act that you do is not going to create this kumbaya moment and erase everything, because you're dealing with individuals time after time that have experienced that, right? But stay the course. You
Yeah.
stay the course, And who knows how long that course is, right? As Arnold and Casey mentioned, it's a daily thing, but it's forever. But slowly and surely, things will begin to, if you stay the course. But don't think that, again, a video, right, or a class or a training class is going to be the kumbaya, end all be all type of, hey, we have erased now centuries of discrimination in this one particular training. It's not going to happen. So don't be frustrated if it doesn't, and don't be frustrated if people don't accept it. It's not from a lack of appreciation. It's, hey, we have to erase what they've been through, what we've been through for many of years and decades and centuries.
Well, and I think it's that accountability piece, which I know we've talked about throughout the podcast, is, Janelle, you mentioned you took that training and no one's talked about it since. How are we not, why are we not holding people accountable for what is expected? And that's the thing with, when I think about hiring and, you train your hiring managers on bias interview training. Okay, let's do our bias interview training. And then that's it. We leave them to their devices. No one's holding them accountable to making sure that they're taking what they learned at the training and applying it. So that's why I always say to my recruiters, diversity should be a conversation on every recruitment strategy meeting. Every single one, you should be talking about it. Yes, your hiring manager did their bias interview training, but you've got to keep talking about it. You got to keep it, in the moment. You can't be referring to a training that someone took in 2016, as Janelle called out.
Sorry, Jim. Sure, your training was great.
Yep. I mean, it was great, but like,
but it doesn't help if it's only one instance in time,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
You said no one talked about it after. Well, we've got to hold people accountable when we're trying to provide, some opportunity for them to develop.
Yeah. It's just as important as workplace safety, workplace harassment. Those trainings are ongoing. There's not one employee in the organization that does not lay their eyes on that and has to sign off on those types of things, right? So that's a start, right? I'm not saying that's a start. It just tells you how important, if you are a company that is committed, 100% committed and engaged to a DEI environment, that should be as important as your workplace harassment, your workplace safety, all those things that you integrate on an annual basis, that you spend tons of dollars to ensure that everyone's committed and engaged to that particular mission, should be the same.
Arnold, I'll throw to Arnold for last word on this, just on anything else that you wanted to add in terms of what companies should not be doing.
It feels like, to Gary's point, it should be constant, incremental, but we're still navigating that discomfort. The discomfort of feeling like the overall society is unfair, shrinks down into the workplace and becomes a discomfort in, I don't want to have to deal with this every day. There are days I just want to do my job, and that could be for both sides, majority or minority of the workplace, and not have to confront this constant reality of the situation. It's on the street, it's in my workplace, it's in the home, it's in, my kids, got a different grade than his counterpart for doing the same work. It's so incessant that people do want breaks from that in general. So, but we know that it has to be spoken to constantly in a way that, to Gary's point again, is like workplace safety or harassment, but in a tone that is not preachy, in a tone that can lead people to open up their feelings, because there's a lot of walls around their feelings on both sides, from the majority understanding or even admitting that the environment is as unfair as it is a wall that might not ever come down. The same way that folks in the minority who are good at their jobs and who excel feel like they want to be accepted for their work and their efforts and their background as well, in terms of their background of excellence. So, how do you bridge those things is a really nuanced conversation. And all of those real points have to be brought into the mix.
Well, I think that's a good note for us to conclude on. Just to summarize what I think I heard, we're sort of talking about like what activities should companies engage in or not engage in, and I think that's sort of the wrong way to frame this, because what I think I'm hearing is that diversity and equity and inclusion are not activities, they are values. And if you're not authentically living those values, then you're not going to create the spaces where these kinds of conversations can happen. So that's really, before you're planning your set of activities, really reflect on how those values come to life for you personally and for your organization. And just for Janelle and for Arnold in joining us today, I really enjoyed this conversation. I so appreciate you both sharing your perspective today, along with our usual characters, Gary and Casey. So thanks everyone for joining. It was a great discussion. I really appreciate everyone's perspective on our topic today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
To speak with any of today's participants about your Just Start journey, email juststart@hudsonrpo.com.